Okay, so here is the notes, and then we can talk about servlets. All right, so chapter 7 talks about servlets, and I mean, when we talk about servlets, we talk about specifically Java servlets. Okay, so let me close this over here. We'll look at what is the servlet, how does it work, and we'll also do some examples. Okay, tonight. And again, a servlet is really it's really just a program. Okay, it's just really just a Java file if you think about it, that process data on the server side. And so now we're talking about again the concept of a client side and then server side. So you've seen that picture, I mean, maybe a million times already. But it deals with mostly just and a web server. So HTTP protocol is probably the most common types of protocol that a servlet deals with. Although that's not the only one, it does deal with other protocol as well. But HTTP is the most common one, and servlet was built, was created for that purpose. I mean, servlet was conceived back in like 1997, so it's like 20 years ago. Okay, when Java came out like a couple years before that. So just to make sure again that you have we have effects installed, we have that already. That's I think kind of we did this way back in the beginning, so that's a good thing. So a servlet is a definition of that. It's just really a language classes or a program, right? That use process to request and produce dynamic web pages. So the key word here is the dynamic part. Okay, everything here is on the server side. So it's responsible for the creation, if you can create dynamic web pages as well as content on any web page. Okay, so we know that on a server, a web server doesn't have the capability to create dynamic content. It hosts these files, but its job is basically to only serve static data. So if you have like a .html file, an image file, or a video file, then a web server can serve that to the requester, but it does not know how to generate dynamic content. So to do that, you need a special helper application such as JSP or JSF or PHP or ASP.NET and all those other server-side languages. Okay, so to run a servlet on an Apache or on a machine, you need a helper application, and this is also sometimes called a web container. And if you heard the word tomcat before, this is one of them. Okay, so tomcat is the one that we'll be using. That is created by Apache, which is the server that runs PHP and so on. Also, another one called Glassfish. This is created by, of course, Java themselves, the creators of Java, which is Sun Microsystem initially. Now it's Oracle. So you can use either one of those. And Eclipse, you can use either one of those, or you can use others. There are actually many others also out there, but these are probably the two most common ones. Another kind of more popular one is called JBoss. Okay. I don't know who forgot the name of the company who created that, but that's another one. And there are other as well by Microsoft and IBM and so forth. But Tomcat and Glassfish are the two common ones. Okay, so this week we'll deal with a servlet, and the next week on we'll go over the JSP, JSF, and other web services as well. We'll also be learning WebSockets. If you have learned that before, this will be another review for that. Okay, but again, all these are web-based. They deal with web pages. Okay. So if you look at this here, I'm just going to say that applet. This is something kind of really old technology now. I mean, you probably don't see that anymore. You might see maybe once in a while, but it's kind of dated now because the HTML5 that came out and it pretty much wiped out applet and of course Flash. Okay, so applet is that kind of like Flash back in the days, where you can build a container that generate dynamic content on the web page. So an applet, if you were to create one, that would extend the applet superclass, which is there's a superclass called applet, and then the servlet will be extending the HTTP servlet, and the HTTP servlet actually extend another superclass called servlet, and then extend another class called generic servlet, and so on. But we'll see that in example of codes, you'll understand a little bit much better. But you always extend this HTTP servlet in order for it to work. Okay, so let's look at this static web pages, this diagram here. And you can see that we have the client side and on the server side. Okay, every time you see this, you always think that maybe client is always a remote, a local computer, and then server is like a remote location. Okay, it doesn't have to be that way. It's just a diagram to show you that you're actually separating the client side from the server side. But your client is just basically your browser, okay, on your local machine, your laptop. And the server is another piece of software that is residing inside your computer, your laptop, right? So you have those two different technologies, and they communicate each other through some type of protocol, which is HTTP protocol, right? So so don't confuse yourself that, oh, a client has to be my local machine, and the server is just like it's somewhere out there in the cloud or something. It can be, but it can also be just your local machine. So a client is usually a browser. Your web browser is a client. So when we refer to a client, we always refer to the browser. It's easy to understand that way. So when you web browse on your web browser, if you load up Chrome and you want to request or load a web page, whether it's remotely or on somewhere on your local machine, like a local host. Okay, local host is your server. Then you're basically sending a request to that server, and if that page or the content or the type of data is static, like a .html file or an image file or a video file, then that server can serve that data back. Okay, this is all static. It has to exist there, otherwise the server cannot find it, right? And this is pretty straightforward. So now, and then we have the dynamic web pages. Okay, we're introducing a different type of technologies, to communicate with the server side. And so now, instead of just serving static data files, .html files, and so forth, the server can now communicate with another helper technology, helper application to generate dynamic content. And usually when we talk about dynamic content, either that's from a text file, you save data from a text file, or usually it's from a database, right? That's where you store data in order to generate dynamic content. But it doesn't have to be a database. It could just be something that generated randomly by the file itself, like that, or it could be that file could be retrieving data from another website outside of your local machine or your local server, right? It's still data from elsewhere, okay? And those data will be generated by that helper application. Okay, so if you look at this diagram here again, the client side is the one on the left here. Okay, here is the Apache web server, and then over here is on the purple box over here is actually called the web application. And this diagram here is okay, but it's kind of a little bit different from what I would redesign. So really, this whole thing on the left here, from this circular disk all the way out here, is really on the server side. Okay, so you could think of like this whole thing here. It's on the server side, and then this is just the client side. So when the client side make a request to a static file on the server, Apache server, that server will just basically respond back by sending the data back to the client without going back to the database part, right? So that's pretty easy. But now if it wants to have requests for dynamic content, then now the server doesn't know how to do it. Now it needs to get the helper application here. So it needs the web application. In this case, would be the container here, the tomcat, to serve those data. So then tomcat will look for either the JSP part, or the servlets, or the JSF, right? Depending on which technology you use. So in this course tonight, this chapter will be covering the servlets part. So the tomcat, which is a web container, okay, is responsible for communicating with JSP, JSF, and also the servlets. Okay, so you need this tomcat server or this container to reside on the web server. So if you run on, like for example, Apollo, our web server, you need to have tomcat there in order to generate or to run JSP file. Just like if you run PHP on the web server, you need Zend engine to render those files. Or if you're running ASP.NET, ASP, you need that ASP.NET framework as well. Okay, so that help application in this case is Tomcat or a Glassfish. Okay, either one. So the web server here will communicate with the Tomcat or the web container, and then that will communicate with the servlets, and then the servlet will do its job, and then it will return the response back to the web container, web applications, in Tomcat in this case, and the Tomcat will send the response back to the web server, and the web server will send that back to the browser. So you can see the process of going back and forth the system, and because of you can see there's so many steps involved, sometimes it actually slows down the server. So there's always a head cost, overhead cost to these type of technologies. But nevertheless, that is the way things are built. Okay, so again, a client sends a request to the server. That would be, to be more specific, would be like a HTTP request. It's a GET or a POST. When we say GET, you remember how you send a form to a processor file. You send it through using the GET method or the POST method, right? The GET is basically you will see the data be appended up here in the URL, okay? Or if you send POST through the form, then it will send in a different route. It will not be visible in the browser, but it will send the data to the server that will be contained inside the body of that request. And then the server can receive those data using either the GET or the POST method, okay? And then again, if it receives that data, and if it's a non-static data, then the server needs to pretty much like recompile or reconvert that data, and then sends that as an object to Tomcat, or will communicate with Tomcat and say, hey, I need this web page called something that or JSP or whatever it is. Then Tomcat says, okay, then Tomcat would then communicate with JSP or servlets, depending on which way it goes, and it would send a request. Actually, it would send both request and response objects to that servlet, and then it will do its job, and it will send a response back, and then just like the route I mentioned earlier. Okay, so this is how the process works behind it. That's the big picture. Okay, but inside the servlet itself, the servlet has its own life cycle. Okay, so when Tomcat sends a request to the servlet, then it would start the servlet. The servlet would start its initialization process, and then it will start the service, and it would do either its POST or its GET methods, depending on what type of request was sent over. So it was sent as a GET, then it will process the GET inside. If it's sent as a POST method, then the POST will be served inside here as well. And then you will use the servlet to create a dynamic web page, and then you will send that data back as a HTML file, okay? Because only browser understand that, right? It generates HTML file, and those data will be sent back to Tomcat, back to web server, and then back to the browser. Okay, so that process, and then once that's been done, it's been completed. Then if Tomcat is completed its job, then you can turn it off, and then you can destroy the servlet. So it will go through that process. Okay, so let's see here. This is just for running Tomcat. Now, if you have XAMPP, if you install XAMPP, I believe it should already have Tomcat with it, right? So what I mean is that if you run XAMPP like this one, you should see Tomcat here. Okay, if you don't see it, then you need to install Tomcat or Glassfish. Okay, so I think once you install XAMPP, it should already have the Tomcat. Okay, if it doesn't, you can follow the instruction here and download it and then install it, and that should be fine too. Okay, yeah.
So which is better, Glassfish or Tomcat?
Either one is fine.
Either one's fine.
Yeah, either one's fine. It will work on both Eclipse and NetBeans, either way. So you see later on, I'll show you when you select the database, the server, it will show you all those options. Okay. So sometimes if you run Tomcat, if Tomcat runs into some kind of issue, it doesn't work, you can switch to Glassfish, and vice versa. In the past, I had students, right, we had some issue with Tomcat, it didn't work for some reason, and so we had to switch over to Glassfish. Okay. All right. So this is where you would download Tomcat. If you also can just search for Tomcat, and it will tell you where to get those. Installation is pretty easy. Just download, install, and it will do all that automatically for you. And when you run Eclipse, it will know where Tomcat is, and so on. Okay, so and this is a process. This is a process how you can create the servlet, and I'll go through this with you. We'll do example together in class also. But before we do this, I want to tell you also. I'm going to go over the just kind of point out where things are laid out in Eclipse, so you understand what is this web folder and so on. Okay, so we'll go back and revisit this again. This process of creating this servlet. So I'm gonna go right into, after you create your servlet, you should have something that look like if I can see it here. Where is it at? Oh yeah, this is the this is the actual life cycle of the servlet. Okay, so when Tomcat issues say, hey, I need this servlet to do something, to create a web page or to generate some type of data, then it will go through this life cycle. Okay, it will load the servlet class, and then it will create an instance. Again, a servlet is just an object. Okay, from the file that you write, and then it will call this initial method. Okay, this init method here only gets called once through the entire lifecycle of the servlet. So when you load that servlet or that web page, it will call this init only one time, and you use the init method to initialize your data, to load some data, to load any default data you want to use in the servlet. So they get called once. And then the service here is where the actual activity gets recycled or gets called. So when you load this servlet, again, you think of it as just a web page. Okay, when you load the web page, then you can, if you click refresh to reload the browser, okay, what it does is basically it just recycles to this ready state here. It's not going to go back and reinitialize your web page. Okay, it doesn't do that. Okay, so it loads the servlet, initialize it, and then it's in a ready state. It just keeps generating data here. If you click refreshing your browser, that's all you get until you terminate the servlet. Then it will call destroy here, and it removes that servlet out of the object, out of the server. So the initial state init and destroy method gets only called once, whereas the service, there's a function called service, as well as a function called do get and do post and do put and do delete. Several others are being called inside the recycle here. Okay, and I'll show you a little demo of how that's really how it really works. Okay, so yeah, I don't have the picture there, but okay, well maybe we just go ahead and create it, and then once we create that servlet, then I'll explain what I mean when I said where things are. When you map it out, how do you map that to a web page? So if you think of a web page, like if you have a Chronos account, or well, Chronos not there anymore, or Apollo, then you usually have a domain name, right? And then inside the domain you have a directory. Inside the directory you have a lot of files. So I'll show you how you map it out from Eclipse to a particular location on your web page, so you know where things are. Okay. So why don't we go ahead and then create a servlet before we take our break. So the first thing we need to do is if you want to load Eclipse, okay, and then let me just clear everything here. So load Eclipse, and we're going to create a servlet. So let me go back to my notes here, so just in case we don't forget. So right up here, servlet. So again, just remember that servlet is nothing more than just a Java file. Okay, that's all it is. Okay, it's way up here. All right, so we're going to create inside the web folder. You should have that one there. If you don't have it, we need to install and download that for us. I think we did this way back in about week 2, week 3. Okay, we download a lot of files, Java effects, and so on. Right? I made sure that you have this configured, installed. Okay, so let's go and create a servlet. You go to a new project. Let's see, yeah, new project, and then here, just if it doesn't see it here, you can just browse it down until scroll down until you see the web tab or web folder. Click on the web, and we're going to create a dynamic web project. Okay, so your JSP, JSF, and so on. So we'll be using the web project here because these are again web pages. So you click on the web project, click next, and you can give it a name. So you regular your project. We'll give this one here chapter 37. Maybe I'll call it Servlets. Okay, that's the project name, just like your JavaFX project name and so on. And the runtime here, this is where you would actually select the Tomcat. Okay, so if you have Tomcat installed, it will show up here as Tomcat, which version it is that you have. I think well, mine is version 7, so you can choose 7. If you have version 9 installed, maybe version 9. Okay, but you don't have any. Okay, if you don't have any, then we'll configure it later. Okay, then that's okay. We will configure that later. If you do have it, well, let's see. If you don't have it, maybe you can click here, and do you have it here? If you click on the new runtime, do you see Apache and? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So you can pick it here. From now, it's fine. If you don't do it, you can pick it up later. It's fine too. But if you, since it's already here, you can go ahead and then select. I think Apache 7 is what I have. So I'm not sure if you have 7 or not, but you can try 7. If it doesn't work, it will tell you later as well. So let's just say you picked version 7. Okay, just click finish, and it should be listed here as a default. Okay, so everything you create is servlet, it will select that for you. If it's not, you can always change it. And the rest here, you could just leave it as a default, as it is, and then click next. You can leave this part blank. Just note that on the bottom here is as a default output folder is build / and then classes. Okay, this is where your output is, right? So when you compile your Java file, usually you put into a class, and this is where it is. So when we see the folder on the left side later on, you see there's a folder called build, and then under there is folder called classes. So when you compile, this is where your output is going to be located at. That's all it's saying. And we'll leave that as is, and then click next. And then of course the context root, just leave this as is. You also want to click this checkbox, this little checkbox here. This one, it says generate the web XML deployment descriptor. Okay, this is a special file that is used for kind of like if you are familiar with MVC, okay, model view controller application or framework before, then this is like a what do you call a router. Okay, it's like a configuration file, and it routes your web pages. So that means, because again we're talking about dynamic web pages, so I mean you don't have to have a web page called my page or something, right? You could have the servlet. The servlet will create it automatically for you, and then it's based on this web file. So this web file, you can have a pattern called something / my page, but really there's no physical file called my page. It will be rendered automatically based on this descriptor. Okay, so let's check this on, and then we'll look at the content and see what it is. And I'll show you how you can actually configure that as well. And then you should just click finish, and we are now one step away from creating a servlet. We're not there yet. Okay, so now you should have your folder called whatever you call it, my servlets here. If you expand that folder, you'll see a bunch of files. So here's the build. We saw that earlier, right? So inside is a inside here you don't have it yet, but once you compile, your class will be built inside this build folder here. Below that you have another folder called web content. Okay, if you expand that folder, you'll see two additional files called meta inf, which just means information, metadata, and then there's another called web information. Under the web information, you see that there's a library, and this is the web XML. The web XML is again that the file where we actually you can it's a descriptive file, right? It's kind of describe what your web page is about. And well, this is also in the web content. This is also where you will create your HTML file. So you can build, you can add like about HTML, index at HTML. You put it in here, and then these files can load on the browser, and then from the browser you can link it to, as if it's a form, you can send that off to your servlet. Okay, so if you look at this web content here, this is related to your web page, web directory. Okay, you think of the web content as your home directory on your Apollo site, for example. So if you have an account with Apollo, if you go to FTP, you log in there, and then you're in your directory. This is the same location. Okay, it'll be in the web content. So that means that if you create an HTML file in here, then you will be going to this web content folder as your root directory. Okay, all right. So this is where your web files are stored, and then inside the Java resources, the same place as the other places. So the word resources is where you have your Java file. So if you look in here, we look very similar to before. That's src, and then you should see there's nothing there yet. So we can create servlets in here. Again, servlets is just a Java file. Okay, and so before we run this, you need to import another jar file. Okay, that is so that you can communicate with Tomcat. Okay, so we do that by going the same way as we did before with the MySQL connector. Okay, so you can click on the project here, right click, and go to properties down here, or click on the project menu and then click properties. Okay, and then on the Java build path, if you are not there, just click on that build path, go to the libraries tab, and then we need to go and then add the external jars. Okay, and then now we need to find Tomcat. Where is Tomcat installed? So if you run XAMPP, it should be inside the XAMPP folder. Okay, so that means I'm going to go and find my XAMPP folder, which I think is probably in my C drive. Maybe. Ooh, out of memory here. So I go to C drive, down where the XAMPP folder is, open that, and I see there's a Tomcat. Okay, open the Tomcat, and I think it's in the bin folder. Is it? Don't remember. Let me see. Let's see what is it at? I got that part. Because we need to load that in there. I think it's down here somewhere. We'll get to that part in a minute. Okay, so the jar file, go to Tomcat. Okay, it's in the library. Okay, so library, Tomcat library. You want to get this servlet API.jar. Okay, so I'll select that one in the library, and then there should be a Tomcat right here, the servlet API.jar. You should have that file. If you don't, maybe something's wrong with the installation. Okay, so you click that and then just open it, and then now it should be here, and then you can apply or just click OK, either way, and then we should be back to our folder here, and it should be inside the library somewhere. But once you've done that, then you should be fine. Okay. So now we're going to create a servlet. Again, servlet is just a Java file. So go ahead and create. Go to New, and you should see servlet. Okay. If you don't see it, then go to Other, and then under the Web folder, you should see a servlet. Okay. As you can see, you see like we have JSP, right? So we'll deal with that later. Next time we cover JSP. So servlet, you click on that one, give next, and then you can give it a package name. The package name we learned already, just a directory, right? So that is pretty typical. Usually you want to put it into a package so that you have your own package. But you can leave it blank, it's fine. And by convention, a package in which I think we didn't really discuss about it, but when you build applications in Java, you want to put in terms of, if you think of it as like a domain name, but it's the reverse of your domain name. Put .com first, com dot, and then maybe your company name, the dot, the project name, right? That would be a pretty typical package name. So something like com dot, chapter 37 dot servlet, right? That would be a typical Java package. Okay, so I could do that, or I could leave it out. It's fine. I would just leave it as is, and then the class name is just like before. What do you want to call it, right? So we could just say, I don't know, what do we call it? Any suggestions besides Hello World? Let's call it maybe my first. Well, that's too long. Just call it first servlet. It's fine. Okay. So that first servlet is there, and then you can now click next. Again, this is just a class name. So next, and then you see that you can leave this blank initialization parameter. You don't have to worry about that for now. Down here, see the URL mapping. Okay, this is the map to your browser. So that means that on your home page, you will have a link that says something, localhost / something / first servlet. That's the web page you're going to. It's going to map to this class file. If you want to change it to something else, you can rename it to something else. You can call, index, or you can call it something like hello or something. Okay, it doesn't really matter, and it will be mapped to your file. For now, just leave it as is, and we'll change it later. And then click next, and you are presented with some other options here. You'll see that it has these options down here. A lot of methods. Okay, these I mentioned earlier about the life cycle of a servlet, right? So you have the init method. So let's turn that on. Okay, do post and do get, as you can see, they are automatically checked for you by default. It's for the post and the get methods in the form. Also, let's check on the service. Okay, and then we'll leave the rest as is, and just click finish. And then now you should have this file created with a lot of comments, and I'm going to remove these comments so you can see them a little bit better. Okay, you can remove all these here. It's difficult to see. Okay, so these are the files on some of the methods that are part of the HTTP servlet here. Okay, you see that it would have all the imports here. This is our package name, right? Again, if you have the something dot something dot something, it just means you have two folders, right? There's a folder called com, there's a folder called chapter 37, there's another folder called servlet. The inside the folder called servlet is where this file called first servlet.java lives. Okay, but in Eclipse you see that it's just a dot notation. So if you look in the source folder here, you see that it's the dot notation, but really it's 3 folder structure going down. Okay. So if you look at this, you see that the first thing you see on the top of this a class called first servlet, it extends the HTTP servlet. Okay, so this is a child class of this parent class, or the super class. Okay, and something here, like you see line 14 here, this is called the annotation, and then inside the annotation you have a slash and then first servlet. You've seen that before, right? Yeah, this is the mapping, right? So that means that this servlet called first servlet is going to be called first servlet. And if you want to change it to like, oh, I want to call it hello, then you change it to hello. And then hello will be mapped to first servlet. I mean, Tomcat is responsible for doing that for you. Okay, so this is easier for us to type on the URL versus something like that, right? So you can have a really long class name here, and then the URL will be really short, like you know, give it what name you want to call it. So I'll leave it as is for now. And this is, you can leave the as default. You just give a serial number for this servlet. Okay, this is so what is this? This part here. Does it look familiar? This is just the constructor, right? Okay, constructor because of this class. Constructor is calling the super class constructor. That means it's going to call the HTTP servlets constructor. Okay, so you can leave it here, you can leave it out, it's fine. You can delete it, it's okay too, doesn't matter. And then you have the init here. So when you run this servlet, the first thing it's going to look for is going to load this init method. So you notice here you don't have a main method. Okay, you don't need one, because a servlet is running on the server on the browser, so it's different from your typical Java program. You don't have a main method, and you don't need it. Okay, so the web container, which is a Tomcat, it will call the servlet, and the servlet will initially call this method first one time, only one time. Then after that, it's going to call the service, and then it will call the do or the get, do get or the post, depending on which method you would you know, call from the web form. But the default method is I think it's a do get. It's a get method. That is the default method. And then you don't have to destroy here. We could put a destroy here down here, but we don't have it. I forgot to turn it back on. But that would be the destroy method down here. So we have these part. So now if you so this is fully functional, okay, already, and we just need to run it. So to run it, we need to no, you don't have to. Yeah, it's gonna call the super class destroy if you don't have it. You could have it here just to so you can override it, and you can put some additional messages in there. If you don't, then I'm just gonna call the parent method and just terminate the servlet. Okay. Same thing here. The service here, I just put it here so we can see how it works. But really, you don't need this either. You don't have to. The most important ones are probably just these two here, the get and the post. Okay, depending on the type of form you're going to be accessing. So for now, let's see if we can run this servlet. And if you click on run, or if you click here, right click and then run on server. Okay, same thing. And it should ask you to run to select your server, which is the Tomcat localhost. Okay, see if you see that here. Do you see it? For those of you who are running, if you don't see it, let me know. But if you do see it, then just just select that, and then you can just basically click finish. And okay, got an error here. Let's see. Okay, the problem with this thing is that you have to be kind of patient. Okay, sometimes the server takes really slow to start, and if it doesn't start, you have to like close it and then try again. Okay, and then if it still doesn't work, we have to figure out why. Let's see. I'm thinking, did I start down here? No, that's not started. Okay, another thing is you want to see the servlet, the server is if you go to usually window, show view, servers, okay? You click on that server, you see a tab down the bottom down here. You should see Tomcat. If you don't see down here Tomcat, you might see something like this. Let me delete this. You might see that, okay, on the servers tab. No servers available. You can click it to create a new server. Okay, so if you see that, just click on it, and then we're back here to what Tomcat was before, right? So you can select the Tomcat version, which is mine 7, and then go next, and then my project is my first chapter 35 servlets. Okay, you can add that over here. If you don't, it's gonna do it's gonna add for you later anyway. Add that there and make sure it's on the right side of this window, and click finish, and then now it should say if you expand this little arrow, you should see that the 35 servlets is here. So you can run multiple servlets on this server, not just one. Okay, so you saw the list I showed you earlier. If you have a lot of servlets, you can keep adding there, and they'll all be running on the same server here. So it says stopped right now. You can right click on it and then start the servlet, the server here, assuming there's no error. If there is an error, then sometimes again just stop it, restart again, and then you have to be kind of a little bit patient with this server. Sometimes it's really slow. So once I start it, and let's see if it works this time. Run it again. Okay, select that. Let me see what happened next. It's there already. It's good. And then now it runs. So this time it's working. So as you can see, it has localhost, the port number 8080, because Tomcat uses the 8080. So if you go here, if I were to turn on Tomcat, you see that it uses port 8080 here. Okay, so make sure that it doesn't run here. If you do run here, then it's trying to run a different version of Tomcat. They have a conflict. Okay, and then just make sure it turns off here. You don't want to run here. So this is a website, a web page. You can copy this URL and then take it to a browser, and then just paste it here. You'll see that it's just a web page. And there's no extension, as you can see. There's no .jsp or .html or whatever, because it's a servlet. And if you do a source view, and you see that there's nothing there, because we didn't put any HTML code in there. Okay, so back in here. Now let's just show some things in here. Let's show. I wonder why it's not showing that. I would think it would show something in there. Okay, I want to show. Let's say I'm going to go to init method here, and I'm just going to print out a message. Okay, I'm going to put like system out, and let's just say init initialization or init. So we know that it's calling this method, and then I'm going to copy this, put it inside the service here as well. I'll just put service. Okay. And then we'll put here, and then we'll see what happens. This is inside the do get. Put here as well, and see. Let's see what it looks like. Do post. Okay, and this again just going to print out to the console down here. Okay, so I'll leave the console open here. And once you make changes here, you sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You have to recompile this whole thing again. It means you can't go back here and just refresh it. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it does. It doesn't work. So as you can see, it works in this case. Okay, but usually you want to close the browser here, and then in this case, I'm gonna restart everything. So stop Tomcat, and then I will start again fresh. If you don't start, when you run this, it's going to force you to start anyway. It doesn't matter. Okay, so now My console, I'm going to clear it, so I'll make sure there's nothing there. Okay, so when I run this servlet, okay, select that. You can just say always use this every time, so you don't have to choose this every time. Just check that, and then click finish. You can see that it loads the init, right? Then it loads the service, and it seems to stop there. And if I do like a refresh on the browser here, you see it loads the service again, okay, and it doesn't initialize anymore because it does it already once. That means the servlet is still alive, still active, so it doesn't need to do that. So again, if you look at this diagram we saw earlier, the life cycle, right? It stays in here at this state. So that means that we have data being processed on the web page, then it's just keep rendering that page over and over again until you terminate this tomcat, and then it will terminate the servlet, and then it will get destroyed. Okay, so this is the process of a servlet. And then we'll take a break. After we come back from the break, and then we'll do a little bit of coding, how you can add, how you can read data from a web form, send the form data to a servlet, how you can access those data, you process it, and then write it back out to the web page. Okay, so we'll see you back in 10.